Good morning, everyone. Happy Hanukkah. We are on the fifth day of Hanukkah as we begin to shift to the second half of the holiday. Interestingly enough, when there's a discussion as to the origins of Hanukkah presents and gifts and gelt, often people say that it came backwards from the Christmas presents to the Hanukkah presents. There does seem to be a strong tradition going back several hundred years of giving gifts, giving gelt, giving money, giving incentives when it came to uh, children's getting good grades. It was a kind of an incentive. This is the marking period or partially the midwinter recess, and kids got a break for Hanukkah. They'd also get the report cards. There was an opportunity to reward them. Others, it was the kids were there to the messengers of giving a reward to the teachers. They would tip the teachers back in the day, and as a little bit of a reward for being the messenger of that envelope, children would get a little bit of gelt as well. But when it comes to the fifth day of Hanukkah, has been noted that some people had tradition of giving the gelt on the fifth night of Hanukkah. That was the night for presents, because the fifth day of Hanukkah can never be Shabbos. So you can always count on the fact of being able to give money and give presents on the fifth day and not have to worry about any Shabbos restrictions about money or about anything like that. So that was the role of the fifth day of Hanukkah. So I hope everyone gets some good presents or some good gelt, or at least gets to give them or something like that. So, being that it's Hanukkah, and we've been trying to talk about things relating to Israel, and it's Hanukkah, wanted to talk a little bit about. We've seen in the headlines in the last couple of months in Israel the role of the women warriors, the female soldiers in the IDF, and so as you see in the sources, source number one, this is just a couple of days ago. Israel's defense minister lights Hanukkah candles with troops near Gaza. And the article goes on to say, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant finished a visit to the border of Gaza Strip on Friday night, where he met fighters from the Caracal Battalion in the Armored Corps, together with the commander of the 80th Division, Brigadier General Itamar Ben Chaim, the commander of the Paran Brigade, Colonel Raviv Shemer, the commander of the Caracal Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Or Ben Yehuda. Gallant spoke with the female fighters, hearing about their operation on October 7th to eliminate Hamas terrorists in the southern Gaza Strip, and about the assistance they gave ground operation being carried out in the Gaza Strip. Right? And this was something that has been reported in the Israeli news media over the last several weeks about a female commanded tank group that was fighting on October 7th. And the role of women in the IDF has gotten more publicity these days. Gallant told the women fighters, it is impossible to ignore the strong, prominent, successful female presence. Women have not fought in the IDF since 1948. This is the first time this has happened after 75 years of massive fighting. The results are very impressive, both in the operation of the tools, both in the operational result and in the command. The IDF fighters are in dozens of places around Gaza and lighting Hanukkah candles. This is the victory of the new Maccabees over evil and darkness. We turn on the light in Gaza, turn off the lights of those who wish us harm. Those who thought they would turn off our lights see day after day what are the results. In the state of Israel, there's light, and in Gaza, there's darkness, so it'll get stronger and stronger. So there's reference to this idea of the female fighters. And since the war started, there's been more interest and more enlistment on the part of female conscripts seeking combat roles. Source number two from the Times of Israel, December 2nd, IDF said Wednesday it had seen a massive spike in female conscripts seeking to join combat units during the war in the Gaza Strip that began in October. Over the last week, the IDF has drafted young women to various combat units where female soldiers are currently able to serve. The Army has said it has seen a draft turnout above 100%, meaning the numbers that initially planned for, and that 12% of women now joining combat units had asked to change their placement to those fighting roles during the war. So people are wanting to switch, and that's always interesting Jewish math, right? Jewish math doesn't work the same way. Like, how long is a Jewish hour? Well, it depends. In the winter, hours are shorter than 60 minutes. In the summer, they're longer than 60 minutes. How do you have more than 100%? So it's based on expectations. They expected 30 people, and 35 people showed up, so that's considered over 100%. Even though 100% is all the people who are there, I'll leave it for the mathematicians to work through. Separately, the IDF said Wednesday that 2 female recruits had for the first time completed screening tests for the Air Force's Elite Unit 669, a helicopter-borne search and rescue force, will be drafted to the unit later this month. They'll then undergo 20 months of training, and if they complete it, they'll be the first female soldiers in Unit 669. Women soldiers were directly involved in battles to defend against the massive numbers of invading terrorists, including an all-female tank unit that fought for hours, killing dozens of attackers along the border in communities attacked by Hamas. Female soldiers were also among those killed by Hamas and among those taken hostage alongside their male counterparts. There was an article yesterday about female IDF soldiers being the ones who were held together with some of the younger children, and they braided their hair and kept them company. So we know that there are female fighters in the IDF, women warriors, and being that it's Chanukah, so maybe we'd explore that aspect of it as well. It will also spend a little bit of time discussing the idea of women in the IDF as a general Jewish / halachic concept. But suffice it to say, we now have this Chanukah, as we are celebrating Chanukah, Israel is at war, Israel at war with women in combat roles. More and more women are taking on those roles in a far more, I guess we'll call it progressive way than we see it in, for example, the U.S. military. More and more units are being opened up for women who said that if they're able to pass the training, are able to join, and we'll see how the trend continues. I don't know, as a father of a former IDF soldier, I was kind of pleased that she didn't go into combat, but that was her choice. And we, of course, are all proud of our soldiers. And this idea of women warriors does play a role in Chanukah with regard to a bit of a broader topic in general when it comes to women in halacha, of the women's role in mitzvot. We'll jump to that in just a moment. But any questions on the articles or on the current events component? Just interesting to note how Galant points out how in 1948 having female fighters was not unusual. Back in 1948, whoever could carry a gun was needed, and the fact that there were women taking on those roles together with the men is not surprising. And there have always been women rising to the occasion in battle as needed. So Warsaw Ghetto had female fighters and the like. So it's a matter of necessity, a matter of fighting for the Jewish people that becomes important. So we're going to pivot to discuss this issue within the context. A couple of prefatory remarks. One, the Talmud does not spend that much time talking about the details of Hanukkah. In fact, the Mishnah has no mention of the celebration of Hanukkah. Right, the 6 orders of the Mishnah, especially the one order that deals with all the holidays, Mishnah of Moed, has no tractate for Hanukkah. There's Megillah for Purim, there's Sukkah for Sukkot, there's Rosh Hashanah for Rosh Hashanah, right? There's Pesachim for Pesach. There's no Hanukkah, and the Talmud only has a few pages relating to Hanukkah, even though the Talmud has a whole tractate for Megillah. And it's found within the tractate of Shabbos, dealing with Shabbos candles, Shabbos lights. While they're on the subject of Shabbos lights, they pivot to Hanukkah lights. This omission is quite glaring, and there's a whole discussion as to why that was the case. Some explain it that Hanukkah is really a oral Torah Sheba'al Peh holiday, so much so that they decide to keep it part of the oral tradition as long as possible until they had to write up some of the notes and record some of the conversations in the Gemara. There's also the conspiracy theory of Hanukkah's omission, relating to the fact that the Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, who was the leader of and a descendant of King David. That was the leadership line of the Jewish nation. And the Maccabees, the Hashmonaim, were Kohanim, were priests who assumed the kingdom, which means they went out of bounds. They usurped too much. The monarchy, the political leadership of the Jewish nation was supposed to come from the tribe of Yehuda and not from the Kohanim, and there was a bit of a familial tension, especially as the Maccabees and that family, the Hasmoneans, veered away from the traditional Judaism, embraced the Sadducee tradition, ultimately made a deal with the devil with Rome. And so whatever excitement and commemoration of Hanukkah became part of the Jewish tradition was muted somewhat in rabbinic literature in order to keep to recognize the fact that there was a little bit of lingering disappointment in how the whole process unfolded after the fact. In any event, there's very little with regards to the details historically. A lot more of that is found in some of the books which are not canonical from a Jewish perspective. There's what's called the Book of Maccabees. There's several books of Maccabees. There's a Megillat Antiochus, which seems to come from a more midrashic place. But the Book of Maccabees, which seems to have been compiled, somewhat, within the recording some of the historical events of Hanukkah, does tell us a little bit more detail, and that's where we encounter roles specifically for the role specifically for women. We see there are a couple of female heroines of the Hanukkah story, and that's how the rabbis introduce the women into the Hanukkah observance. And so that's kind of the historical. There's very little about women and Hanukkah in traditional texts, at least in the original text, the Mishnah and the Talmud, but some of these side texts or these contemporaneous texts do tell us a little bit of the role of women, which then gets incorporated into the Jewish tradition, because when it comes to Hanukkah, like Purim, like the Pesach Seder, are mentioned specifically as being obligations for women. When we come to women's obligation in mitzvos, women are not obligated in positive time-bound commandments. So a positive time-bound commandments is where the Torah commands a positive action that's specifically within the context of time. So, for example, tzitzit, wearing the fringes on the four corners, is a positive commandment to put fringes on the four corners, but it's only daytime. So women are not obligated in tzitzit because it's a positive commandment only in the daytime. However, there are plenty of exceptions. For example, what about saying Kiddush on Shabbos? Well, Kiddush on Shabbos is only on Shabbos, and it's a positive commandment, but the rabbis have a rule that if you're obligated in the don'ts, you're obligated in the do's. So if you're obligated in the negative commandments, you can't do any work on Shabbat. Well, once you're keeping Shabbat, then you're also obligated in the positive aspects as well. And they also have, one of these categories for female inclusion in the obligation is something called Af Hein Hayu Ba'oso Hanes, part of the miracle. And that's where we pivot into the role of women in Hanukkah, because the Talmud, Shabbos 23a, source number 3, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, women are obligated in lighting the Hanukkah light, as they too were included in that miracle of being saved from the degree of persecution. Women were part of Hanukkah because Antiochus did not distinguish between male and female when he oppressed the Jewish nation. And so therefore, women if women were oppressed, then women should be celebrated. So even though Hanukkah is a specific positive action and it's time bound, women were oppressed, so women celebrate as well. So Rashi understands, well, what does that mean women were in that miracle? So source number 4, since the Greeks decreed upon all the virgins getting married to have intercourse with a high official first, and the miracle happened through a woman. So Rashi extends this by introducing us to the idea that there was a specific female element to the Hanukkah story. One was this idea that existed, prima nocte, that if a woman would have to, when getting married, would have to first be offered to one of the Greek officials first. And that's Rashi just mentions that in one short line. And he says the miracle happened through a woman. Doesn't say anything else. Which woman, what was going on. So we don't have more mentioned in the Talmud, and we will see that it's within the Book of Maccabees, which tells the story of a woman who had 7 sons, and they were all killed, and ultimately she sacrificed. She killed herself as well. And they call this a story of Miriam, which is mentioned in the Talmud with regards to the Roman era, but the Book of Maccabees mentions it. And then we'll see this idea of Yehudit, of Judith, will come up in a minute. But first, this idea of af hein hayu ba'oto hanes, being part of the miracle. Right? Aren't women always part of the Jewish nation? So why should there? What is this idea of being part of a miracle? So Rabbi Soloveitchik has a fundamental understanding of this idea of af hein hayu ba'oto hanes, that where he says, and it's a translation of a translation of a piece from Harei Kedem, collecting the teachings of Rabbi Soloveitchik. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said women are obligated in lighting candles, for they too were part of a miracle. As the great Rabbi Moshe answered, there's a distinction between mitzvot in which the essence of its fulfillment is in order to publicize the miracle, and the object involved in the mitzvah is there to publicize the miracle. In other mitzvot, which the foundation of the obligation is to commemorate a miracle, but actually carrying out the mitzvah does not involve publicizing the miracle at all. So there's a difference between Chanukah and other miracles. One indication of whether or not mitzvah has in its observant element of publicizing the miracle, one which is not, or rather the rabbis instituted al hanisim blessing. For it appears that this blessing is only instituted for those mitzvah which have within it the act of carrying them out of element of publicizing the miracle. Right. So, for example, we say that women are obligated in Shabbos Friday night Kiddush. Okay, they were part of it, but that's not the reason that they're obligated, because af hein hayu ba'oto hanes is specifically in times where it's all about publicizing the miracle. What blessing do we say over the Hanukkah lights? We're lighting to commemorate a miracle. If the observance is completely directly connected to the miracle, so much so that we invoke the miracle and or publicize the miracle, and women are considered af hein hayu ba'oto hanes. So, Rav Soloveitchik and understands this subject as discussed by the earlier authorities as not necessarily one of history. Right? Rashi's connecting it to history. The women were specifically oppressed, prima nocte. There was a woman who caused the miracle, who we'll have to explore separately. But Rashi mentions the historical connection. Rav Soloveitchik says it's not about a historical connection, it's about a miracle. If it's a miracle being expressed or publicized, then women are obligated. And we know that for sure with Hanukkah, because we say Sha'asa Nisim Lavotenu. We know that, for example, with Purim, because Megillah also has a similar idea. So for Rav Soloveitchik, the way we understand af hein hayu, women's role, ba'oto hanes, is when the observance, when the action expresses or publicizes the miracle, then women are also obligated. So that's just a little bit of lumdus on the subject, that it doesn't have to go in historical direction. Rashi takes it historically. Rav Soloveitchik understands it conceptually in terms of what the mitzvah is all about. Questions on the lumdus Torah part before we travel down the Rashi route?
Arbakosos also, I think, yes.
So Hirsch is mentioning the af hein hayu ba'oto hanes also connects with the Seder night, and there you have that. You don't have it as explicitly, right? On some level, women are obligated in eating matzah. They're obligated in the 4 cups. Part of that, I think, is because they're obligated in the don'ts. They can't eat chametz, so they have to eat matzah. So there's a do-don't, as I call it. If you're obligated in the don'ts, you're obligated in the do's when it comes to Pesach and the Seder. With the 4 cups, for example, Friday night Kiddush, we take that as an extension of the don'ts to the do's. So maybe Pesach has that too. Although we do say that the cups represent an expression of our freedom, the languages of redemption. I'll give it to you also. I think that at least when it comes to Hanukkah, it's much more directly connected to the miracle. Sha'asa Nisim Lavotenu, we invoke it. At the Seder, we may talk about Me'avdus L'cheres. We also talk a little bit about it, but it's not as direct. But I think that is also a valid way of understanding the 4 cups.
Rabbi?
Yes.
The woman with the 7 boys, with the 7 sons, wasn't she Chana? Chana b'Shivat Baneha?
So in the book of Maccabees, there's no name.
Oh.
It's
I have a septuagenarian memory of Chana b'Shivat Baneha.
Right. So that could be, maybe it was.
You mentioned Yehudit,
So right. Well, that's why you're on the class today.
Right, but my name
is that your Hebrew
name? Yehudit.
So Yehudit gets mentioned, but it's not clear where.
I see.
in terms of that her name was Yehudit. We'll see this idea. This, for example, that story of the woman and 7 children is mentioned with regards to the Romans, but it's not mentioned with regards to Chanukah explicitly. With there's an anonymous woman who has that piece.
Thank you.
Yeah. But so let's pivot into the Rashi route in terms of the history. So so with regards to the oppression, we know that there was this prima nocte concept that we find in history, not recorded specifically with regard to the stories of the rabbis, but the specific Rashi route is expanded upon by the Kolbo, which is one of the early compilations of law and custom that we have, and it's there in source number 6. Women are obligated to light Chanukah candles, for they too were included in the miracle. Right? This is what the Talmud says. This is what we explain. This means that what the enemies came to destroy everyone, men, women, and children. And there are those who say that the great miracle occurred through a woman. Her name was Judith, as the story goes, and she was the daughter of Yochanan the high priest. She was extremely beautiful, and the Greek king wanted her to lay with him. She fed him a dish of cheese to make him thirsty, so he would drink a great deal and become drunk and recline and fall asleep. And it happened just that way. And once he was asleep, she took his sword and cut off his head. She brought his head to Jerusalem, and when the army saw that their leader had been killed, they fled. For this reason, we have the custom of eating cheese dish on Chanukah. So let's unpack this Kolbo. So he introduces us to this woman named Yehudit, Judith, and tells us a story about her killing a Greek general. What does it sound a little bit like? Which biblical story? Yael and Sisera. Right, we have that. We have this in the book of Judges. We have this MO of heroine women saving the day by chopping men's heads off after getting them drowsy and drunk. So
the same modus operandi.
That's right. That's right. So we know that. A. B. So remember, the Kolbo here is talking about a female role, and he's also talking about eating dairy. Emerging from that on Chanukah. So that's definitely a boon to those who like sour cream on their latkes, and we'll talk more about the ritual pieces of it, or the commemorative pieces in a moment. So this Judith, there is actually a book of Judith that exists, and this book, it's one of the works of the Apocrypha. It's been suggested that this actually was written during the Maccabean revolt. Rabbi Tzvi, it's been looked at academically that it's written during the Maccabean revolt, not necessarily historical account, but it was a book for the Jews to keep their resolve. And it seems like it almost tells a story that took place in another time. And so there's it's unclear that this is a Chanukah story. So we have this story, we have the story that originates in Shoftim, and we have it playing out in being recorded as having taken place in other times of oppression against Jews, as a way to inspire, fortify, tell of the heroism of the Jewish reaction. Definitely assigning it to women gives women a unique place, and this is something that the Kolbo and Rashi are saying that there was a miracle that took place through the women, and it enters into this idea that there's a unique female role in the Chanukah story. Rabbis don't tell it, historical documents don't directly tell it; they tell it as taking place, but not necessarily with the Chanukah story. So we don't have as much of that doesn't mean it didn't happen, but we do see it being embraced by the rabbinic halachic tradition as, on 2 levels, this story. One, a unique role for women on Chanukah, and a ritual commemoration of dairy on Chanukah. And we see this play out in the Shulchan Aruch when it tells us about the laws of Chanukah. It talks about Chanukah having 8 days. There are days where we don't eulogize or take on private fast, source number 7. We are permitted to do work. Women have made it a custom not to do work while the candles are burning. And there's an opinion that says we may not be lenient for them, this idea that women shouldn't work while the candles are burning. So we've now taken this idea, and we've said of a women's role in Hanukkah, now also having a female ritual role in Hanukkah as well. Hanukkah, you're allowed to work, but women don't like during the Hanukkah lights. The Ramah mentions also, some say we should eat cheese during Hanukkah because a miracle was done through milk, which Yehudit fed the enemy. He quotes the Kolbo. So we have now from within the realm of Jewish practice, the idea of a special, unique role for women. That's now part of the rituals of one, women not working, two, people eating dairy. Emerging from this story. So the idea of the women's role on Hanukkah provided them with a unique commemoration, no work, and gave everybody else eating dairy. The Aruch HaShulchan puts this all together. Remember, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention this, the whole timeline. The Ramah mentions the Yehudit story with regards to the dairy, not to the work. Aruch HaShulchan, source number 9. Women have a practice, the women who have the practice not to do work as long as the candles are lit, and we should not minimize that practice. That part of the Hanukkah miracle happened to a woman when the decree was made that women, married Jewish women, first had to have prima nocte with a Greek official, like Rashi says. And over time, there was the miracle, over the story of Hanukkah, the miracle of Judith, that got the enemy drunk. And there are those who eat cheese because of this. Even though Shelo Haya Zeh Bizman Nes, this wasn't necessarily part of the Hanukkah miracle. So the Aruch HaShulchan says you got a lot of stories going on. He puts it all kind of into one narrative. Yes, the women had a role because of their unique Hanukkah situation, the prima nocte piece, and therefore they have an additional component of Hanukkah not working. And because of what took place with Judith, whenever it took place, we've incorporated this idea of eating dairy. So Aruch HaShulchan ties together what the Kolbo introduces as having existed with how the Shulchan Aruch presents it as laws, ties it into one, for lack of a better term, female narrative or female contribution to the Hanukkah observance. One, uniquely feminine in terms of not working. Two, the dairy custom that exists. The Taz provides a precedent for this type of idea for women having a special Hanukkah commemoration that men don't have. Source number 10, Velinir Lidamoso Lirosh Chodesh. We compare this to Rosh Chodesh, the Mutar Min Hadin Be'asiyas Malacha. Rosh Chodesh is the day you're allowed to work. Women have a practice of not working on Rosh Chodesh. This was a reward for them for not contributing their jewelry to the golden calf. Right, for those who have heard or experienced the fact that Rosh Chodesh is a women's holiday, there is rabbinic discussion, literature, midrashic content that the holidays were all uniquely assigned for different reasons to different parts of the Jewish people. In Rosh Chodesh, there are 12 months, so there are 12 tribes. So each tribe was given a Chodesh that would be their, Rosh Chodesh would be their holiday. But then came the sin of the golden calf, and the men participated. So the males lost their connection to a festival on Rosh Chodesh, and the women were rewarded for not participating in the golden calf, and therefore they were given the holiday of Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh then becomes a woman's holiday. For the Taz, this is precedent for Hanukkah also being a woman's holiday because of the unique oppression the women faced over the Hanukkah story, plus the heroism of women in general. So let's tie that up in a nice women's holiday knot. As Rabbi Eliezer Melamed explains, source number 11, Jewish women have preserved this special custom to refrain from working while the Hanukkah candles are burning. Some women do not work the entire holiday, especially on the 1st and 8th days. Sounds pretty good, ladies. In practice, the custom is to avoid work only while the candles are lit, and even then only during the first half hour, which is the minimum time that the candles must be lit to fulfill the mitzvah. There is the maximalist position of all of Hanukkah, the first and last days of Hanukkah, and then the baseline halachic position of only the 30 minutes, the first 30 minutes that are there, and that is women's holiday of Hanukkah. This feminine this women's holiday because of the female role. Remember, this is because of the women's active role in the Hanukkah story, whether they were part of the action in terms of the oppression they faced because of Prima Nocte, or because of the role they took in the Yehudis component of stepping up to help turn the tide of battle. That women's role is expressed in these two customs of the women not working, or even giving all the Jewish people the custom of dairy. One of the first Ger Rebbe points out that there's actually a qualitative difference. He ties it together, with regards to, in general, the traditional kind of view of the male role versus the female role. The male role has always been more strict and more specific and more technical. Men have more obligations and commandments, and the women's role being more spiritual, because source number 12, the idea of women having a custom not to do work while the candles are burning. And so he says, L'chara lama nashim dafka, why specifically women? He says, no, because hadlaka ose mitzvah. When we light the candles, it's the lighting that makes the mitzvah. When you finish the mitzvah, the holiday is over. So lighting, once you finish the lighting, you're done with the mitzvah. But the women who carry forth the tradition, for them, the mitzvah is Pirsume Nisa. So as long as the candles shine, the women have a holiday. It's the difference. The men, it's the obligation of the lighting. For the women, it's the eternity or the survival of the Jewish nation, represented by Pirsume Nisa. So it's the Pirsume Nisa that the women are celebrating and not working. Just to show that there's a little bit of a pushback, right? So lest the women take on too much celebration and not enough work. Rabbi Vosner points out that, if we want to understand this technically, we're talking about what work they shouldn't do and to follow this practice, that Nagu Nashim Shalol Asos Malacha Bizman Eros Dolkim, they don't do work while the candles are lit. Chatzi Sha'ah, about a half hour. What kind of work? Nimnos min meleches tevia utvira v'chadoma. These are the more technical, complicated melachot of sewing and fixing. Avol meleches hamitbach kafia ubishul muteres, but they can cook and bake. The idea that not working is not you don't do the complicated work. We don't have this idea of not working on a non-festival. So the analogy that's given is Chol HaMoed. Chol HaMoed is a time when we don't do complicated work. For most of us, Chol HaMoed is turned into a regular weekday, but according to Jewish law, it's a bit of a celebration where certain types of work shouldn't be done. But you're obviously allowed to cook. So, Rav Vosner points out that women should not be doing more, complicated housework, but the basics of frying the latkes is okay. So, just pointing out that there are those who don't want to make sure the women, still make the latkes after while the Chanukah is lit, and not rely on the excuse of the women's holiday. But the idea it is out there. This idea of the unique women's celebratory role in the Hanukkah celebration. Don't work while the candles are lit. The idea recognizing their unique oppression, their role, and also, like the Ger Rebbe points out, that they represent the continuity, the eternity of the Jewish people. So they're celebrating the Pirsume Nisa even after we perform the mitzvah of the lighting all together. Questions, comments, reactions to the female contribution to the Hanukkah story from the women warriors of the era.
Rabbi,
Yes.
I don't know if this is relevant, but for 10 years, Netanyahu knew that Qatar was sending millions of dollars to Hamas. And he had two reasons for not saying anything. He underestimated Hamas, and also he wanted to retain power.
Well, I think you're right. You're right. It's not relevant, and we can revisit. We can revisit it afterwards in terms of his motivation. Other than to say that everyone seemed pretty happy when things were quiet. When things get loud and noisy, we were able to look back and criticize or analyze. I think it will have to do so. Look, it's important to recognize everyone's roles in the events that take place. I probably would say that it's probably something to wait till after the fighting stops to do so, but it doesn't seem like politics takes a break anymore ever. But look, we are very much about remembering and assigning the roles to everyone and the roles that they played. That's what we're discussing, the feminine role of Hanukkah's celebration and the women warriors then, how that gets commemorated today. And look, I would say I don't think most people maintain this custom, as in my experience. I know there's mention of it, of women not working while the candles are lit, but I think it's helpful to keep, if we're taking stock of the whole Hanukkah celebration, to remember the role that the women played in the story of Hanukkah, as well as the commemoration and continuation of the Hanukkah message going forward, definitely has a unique female role of the women.
It's also a great time to take a break, and it's just really nice looking at the candles.
Exactly. I'm a big fan of that. I wrote about that this past week, about just being present, right? As we say, Ein lanu reshus lehishtamesh bahem ela lirosam bilvad. We're just supposed to look at them. It's a nice opportunity to unwind for a bit.
It also, I think it adds kind of the holiday is spiritual, but it adds kind of a spiritual element to it, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that's what the Chidushei Harim, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Alter, the Ger Rebbe, is noting, in that the unique contribution of women to the Jewish ethos is that spiritual side. Like, I always come back to what Rav Soloveitchik very famously said, that he learned the laws of Shabbos from his father, but he learned how to celebrate Shabbos from his mother. And so there's that element that's expressed here as well, in terms of noting both the women's role in Hanukkah and the women's role in transmitting Jewish tradition.
I agree with Wolf, and I just want to say it's very mystical watching the candles burn, and just sitting, and it's so hard to stop what you're doing, and it's just refreshing.
Yeah.
For one.
So women had that role in the Hanukkah story, right? The Af Hein Hayubo Sohanes, to review, we're seeing women have a unique role in Hanukkah, whether it's because the way we celebrate Hanukkah is to express the miracle, and that applies to everyone, male and female alike, as the Rav Soloveitchik conceptually understands it, or Rashi's root, there's a female historical connection to Hanukkah that then gets expressed in women's holiday of Hanukkah, or the practice of eating dairy on Hanukkah, connecting back to women. So we see that, that unique aspect in the holiday's development and celebration. Let's just spend a couple of minutes on the idea of women warriors in general. I mean, for the most part, the idea of women going to war, women are not part of war. So it comes up to the whole discussion of whether or not women are obligated in Parsha Zachor. Right? We all know that everyone makes a special effort to hear Parsha Zachor, the portion of remembering Amalek and the need to destroy Amalek and destroy our enemies, and whether women are obligated or not. And some say women are obligated because everyone has that to destroy the evil. And some say women aren't obligated because women don't fight. Women are not part of the war effort. And we know that with part of the war effort, a lot of people are not part of the war effort. When the Torah describes the going out to war, everyone's assembled, those who have farms that haven't harvested, and those who have women that haven't yet, who haven't gotten married yet, but they're betrothed, anyone who's afraid. So when it comes to war, in general, men do the fighting and women don't do the fighting, is how the Jewish law understands things. However, Sota 44b, Rabbi Yehuda said, in what case are all these statements with regard to the various exemptions from war said? They are said with regard to wars whose mandate is a mitzvah. But in obligatory wars, everyone goes, even a groom from his room and a bride from her wedding canopy. So we have these ideas of, there's milchemes rishus, the wars that are necessary, that were not commanded of us, but in wars that are commanded of us, obligatory wars, everyone goes, bride included. So how is this meant to be understood? Right, and the Rambam talks about this in Milchemet Mitzvah. The entire nation must go out to war, even a groom and a bride from her pavilion. So it's generally, when we talk about contemporary situations, most rabbinical authorities, well, certainly the Orthodox community, are not in favor of women serving in combat roles. They don't promote it. They don't encourage it. Whether or not it's maybe these are not, it's not milchemet mitzvah anymore, or whether because of the complexity of maintaining an observant lifestyle, there are all sorts of issues. And especially when the state of Israel first emerged, that was a major component of carving out an opportunity for women to opt out of military service and have there's the service possibility, or claiming religious exemption, and religious women can claim religious exemption from doing anything. And not having to serve, right? This is separate from the whole discussion about men in Torah study and when they're exempt. But the idea, there was a very strong consensus in the Orthodox community in all the segments that women should not be forced into serving in the Israeli army. And that was, in fact, the agreement that was reached. There was certainly the encouragement for it to do service, because what's wrong with doing service? That's a mitzvah, volunteering, or as well as the opportunity for women to serve in non-combat roles and other roles and the like. But for the most part, very few women, religious women, would serve in more active combat units. But the opportunity is there, and you see it. So you see it if you're in Israel and you're walking around in the uniforms. There are women who are wearing army uniforms, and their army uniform is a skirt and not pants. So you have that component. Certainly the accommodations have been made, and there seems to be, just like there's a rising interest in women signing up for combat units, there seems to be an uptick in religious women serving in the army. And for the most part, though, the rabbinic understanding is not to require this and to see this as necessary. Either we're not in a milchemes mitzvah. What about the bride taken from her canopy? There are those who understand that more, not literally. It's if the groom is going, so the bride is also being impacted by the war. She goes to support her husband. She doesn't actually go out to battle. And so Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, who we often quote with regards to his comments on the contemporary application of a lot of these halachic issues. We saw him with regard to Chanukah above. So here is when his section talking about the nation and the land, that says that even the women are obligated in Hatzalat Yisrael uva mitzvot yishuv haaretz. Women are obligated in saving the nation and settling the land. Lo tzivta hatarat hanashim lehitkayes latzava. They don't have a Torah obligation to enlist or be drafted into the army. She'ein darkan bekach, that's not their way. Kfi she'amru chachamim, she'ein derech isha lichbosh. Women are not there to conquer. Ve'ein darka shel isha lasos milchama, women don't make war. Lachein lo matzina she'nashim yatzu milchama, we don't find the women go out to war. Lo b'tkufat bayit rishon, lo b'tkufat bayit sheni. Either in the first or second temple era. Even though the Talmud says, we saw in source 14 above that the bride and groom go, the Chaim Pasak HaRambam, and the Rambam says this, of course, the groom goes to war and the bride goes home. They leave their wedding site if there's a war, but the groom goes to war and the bride goes home. Women have to help. They're in support roles, or they're in providing food and water roles. They're not taking roles of combat, and that's pretty much the consensus mainstream view of the women don't have that obligation. Obviously, if someone chooses then to support that role, I saw that even those rabbis who vehemently disagree with women choosing to serve in combat units say you have to daven for them if they're in combat units, because once they've made that choice, we want them, like all of our soldiers, to be safe. But it's also interesting that Rabbi Melamed doesn't, invoke the Chanukah story, doesn't invoke Yehudia, says anything. These are, in general, the standard approach has been women not fighting in battle, at least as recorded in our sources. So, the fact that we see this happening more in Israel is something new and something different. And we'll have to continue to see how it develops. But clearly, with the women in Chanukah, in their active role in either the unique oppression or the unique role in helping the victory, leads us to. I think we can say that there were women warriors of Hanukkah that led to their unique celebration, and for those of us who enjoyed their end Hanukkah, that as well. And hopefully, all of our warriors should continue to fight the good fight and be victorious. Yachad ninatzeach, as the saying goes everywhere in Israel. Together we will be victorious. Bayamim hahem vazman hazeh. Just like then, also today.
Amen.
Thank you. That was so interesting.